Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Nom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We tried to rearrange the files to reflect the copy that the witness has and our copies, in line
Yes.
with our copies.
Okay,
Part one, we've taken out Mr. Pilay's statement
yeah,
from that bundle. So it would start with Mr. Shweni's Exhibit U7, start with his
Yes.
statement and his annexures, but they go to the next file, which is Exhibit U7. That is file 6A that I was referring to. And then,
Yes.
unfortunately, because of the volume of the annexures, they spill over to the next file.
yes,
And the
okay.
supplementary statement is in that one.
That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you may proceed then, Mr. Shweni, you mentioned that you had received 2 sets of financials from IDEVA.
In which paragraph were
We're still
we?
in paragraph 16.3.1 at page 19. You had statements with unqualified and opinion and others which were not qualified.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. And we, I raised the discomfort to Mr. Rajiv. So this IDEVA entity, even afterwards, still remained a bit unsatisfactory with regards to, how the turn of events on the qualification, and also the fact that we still did not have the right verification from White and Case and from our business intelligence with respect to this entity.
Yes. And then, if I may just refer the chairperson to Exhibit U7 at page 441. That would be the other one. Exhibit U7 is that other file. Yes. Page 441.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. You make SS44? I can make reference to that.
Yeah, got it.
Have it? Thank you. Could you just turn to page 441 of that exhibit, of that annexure, sorry. Are you there?
I've got it.
Thank you. If you look at it, you see that the income statement is for the period 15 August 2012 to 31st December 2016. You see
Yes.
that?
Yes.
So as an accountant, what does that mean to you? If you get a statement like this from any entity, that is 2012 to 2016, what does that mean?
It means there were no financial statements prepared from the period of, or the date of incorporation to subsequent period in between the end date, suggesting that this entity could be just a shell sort of company. There's no trading or whatever activities.
Yes. And then if you go down, you have revenue there. What does the minus mean there?
It's a zero.
0. What does that mean in accounting terms?
It means they're not generating any revenue. There's no activities in the company that gives them any revenue.
Yes. Thank you. And then if you turn to page 445, the company that we're talking about is?
IDEVA.
Thank you. Page 445.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, under revenue, could you just read to the chairperson what is stated there?
No transactions were concluded to generate any revenue during the period.
So this is the vehicle wherein the money was going to go.
Yes, Chair.
So it had no track record of having traded and it had no revenue.
Nothing, Chair.
Thank you. Now, the next thing that you move to is the application that then Treasury made to the South African Reserve Bank.
Yes, Chair.
That's at page 16.3.2.
Yes, Chair.
have you now moved to, back to
I beg your
the-
pardon, yes, back to
Yeah, you must
exhibit.
just
I always
make
just
sure we
forget.
know.
Yes, thank you. Back to the statement, Exhibit 6A, Exhibit 6, U6A. at page 19, paragraph 16.3.2. You say that you put together an application to the South African Revenue Service, South African Reserve Bank.
That's correct.
Yes. And then you say you were surprised when your application was approved. I couldn't understand that. Why would it be surprising? Because it was your application?
Well, Chair, I was expecting the South African Reserve Bank to come back with a lot of queries, because this was not a standard.
I'm sorry, what paragraph are we on?
16.3.2.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Because this was outside of the normal standard applications, the information that I put in the application, more especially with respect to the complex structure of the group. And I explained in the application what each and every group stands. In my mind, I thought that that would trigger some interaction.
Can you just deal
So
with
was the surprise the actual approval
Yes.
as
Chair.
opposed to the condition?
Not the condition.
It was the actual approval that you found surprising?
Yes, personally, I thought, Chair, that the Reserve Bank would come back with
Queries?
a lot of queries in,
Yes,
in terms of that.
Okay.
I even made a comment at some stage that I really didn't think that I put this application that well, that it would
Yeah.
not generate any questions. Perhaps it was not as explicit as I thought I did
Yeah.
in terms of the concerns
Yes.
that we have.
I'm just trying to, can we just deal with that aspect? The concerns that had been brought to your attention by White and Case, by legal internal at this point, concerns that you yourself had raised.
Yes.
Relating to everything that had to do with the term sheet insofar as to impact on ESCOM. All of those concerns, did you pen those down when you were making your application to SAB?
No, I didn't, Chair, because the concern that I would pen down was relating to this IDEVA in the structure. So I didn't pen down the concerns around the fees. I didn't pen down the concerns around the margin and everything else. So the concern that I'm talking about, which I was expecting, excuse me, which I was expecting the SAB to revert with in terms of, was around the structure. Because remember, in the previous paragraph, what we were dealing with is the validity of validation of these entities. And the reason for us making the SAB application was mainly because of this IDEVA entity that we were going to put the money into, not necessarily about the other aspects of the term sheet.
But then, from what you've told us, that would have been the very issue that would have been of concern to you. The structure of IDEVA, the fact that
Yes.
it had no track record, no
Yes.
trading record at all.
Yes.
And is that how you put it to SAB? That this IDEVA company, which is going to receive whatever it receives, is an entity we've checked now. Somebody had said it was a shoe company. It's registered in the British Virgin Islands. It has no revenue track record, it has no revenue whatsoever. It didn't have financials for this period. Those concerns would have formed the integral part of your application.
Chair, from hindsight, now that you're raising it, and I was, it didn't occur to me at the time in terms of how explicit should I be. At the time, I did not raise it to say these are the concerns that we have.
Yes. So then how does it become a surprise when it is approved? If you have not stated that information to SAB, then how does it become a surprise then when the application is approved?
Because of the extent of the information that I put, even though it was not explicit, because this was way beyond the standard that we normally put in our applications. Look, Chair, I can just add, perhaps to say, perhaps it's an unreasonable expectation of me to have been surprised if I don't lay out in the bare what the concerns were. But my orientation in the Treasury Department, from the people that were dealing with the SAB, day in, day out, in terms of their activities, they orientated me around the license that ESCOM had to trade with the SAB, which is not necessarily a right, so to say. So I had to, and secondly, the relationship that we had with SAB, maybe compared to the other organs of state, like the Department of Public Enterprise and National Treasury, that relationship is a bit on an arm's length transaction. So for me, and granted, I never inquired as to how sufficient this application is for SAB to come back with the queries. So I wanted to err on the cautious side so that I don't risk that relationship. So I just put the information, not necessarily quite extensively.
Without the information that would have made SAB to say, I don't want to approve this, would it be correct for me to say what you put up was actually misleading because you left out the very essence of the concerns that you had, which might have caused SAB not to approve the application?
I didn't think about that at the time, Chair.
But when you look at it now, this is 2019, when you look at what you put in and what you ought to have put in, do you realize, or would you agree with me that what you put in was somewhat misleading?
Yes, Chair. Just, perhaps SAB would have come to a different conclusion if I had put that information on the application. However, where I was sort of even, my thinking at the time, I agree with you now, my thinking at the time is that SAB could come back and say, why do you lodge an application with us if you still you don't have your house in order? You're raising these concerns about IDEVA, you're raising these concerns. So go and sort out those issues, and then you revert to us with a proper application when everything has been sorted. And I could have been wrong, I admit, but those are some of the things, and guarding this relationship, so those are some of the things that were going on in my mind.
Yes, but I beg your pardon.
No,
I thought you had finished.
I'm done.
Thank you. But what would have been wrong with that approach from SAB? Because from what you had told the chairperson, this transaction was not going to put money in ESCOM's pocket immediately.
Yeah.
So there was no urgency from what you've told us so far. So if SAB had said, look, you have not complied with A, B, C, D, and E, go back and comply with that, how would that have affected the process that we are following with this proposal?
It wouldn't have, Chair, because we had I don't want to say the luxury of time, we had the time because we're not rushing to get the money immediately, but it didn't occur to me at the time.
Yes. Would I be correct also to say or to suggest to you that what appears to have been clear was that in as much as ESCOM had all these difficulties around this transaction, the officials wanted this transaction to go through?
Not necessarily.
All right, let's test that.
Well, personally, I can speak for myself.
Yes. No, but we've just dealt with the SAB issue. If you were keen to make sure that everything that is supposed to be complied with is complied with, your SAB application would have been different. That we've agreed.
So say that again?
If you wanted to make sure that there is compliance with everything,
yes,
your SAB application would have been different from what it is, because you would have told SAB your concerns about these entities and why you think this transaction would be risky to ESCOM.
Now, yes, but at the time, that did not occur to me.
No, but what exactly was it that was happening at the time, which would have made just about everyone to do things wrong. We know that the term sheets were never signed, but they were signed. We know that before the RFP is issued, people go to China, and that has never happened, according to your evidence. The RFI process gets abandoned. The RFP process is not proceeded with because of the complexity of the proposals and the differences in the proposals. All of these are happening in this transaction. Now, the question is, what is it that was happening, which we do not know, which the chairperson doesn't know, that was making it possible for the officials or those who were making all these memos that we've mentioned to say that approve this must go through, the term sheet must be signed. You know, what was actually happening at the time?
Chair, that's quite a difficult question, but personally, the issue of the signed term sheet that had a cancellation fee on it, and that cancellation fee states that if in the process we frustrate the negotiations and the conclusion, that haunted me in a way, because I wanted to make sure that I don't stand in a way and be the one who kind of frustrates the process. The example of the sub that we're talking about, if that application, perhaps in my mind, were to lay bare all the problems, and all you're saying to sub, don't approve because we have all those problems, and I wouldn't be the one to trigger that cancellation, because it could be read that we frustrated the process in terms of negotiation and conclusion in bad faith. So that's the other thing that was playing in my mind in terms of this thing has been signed. So it's really, we need to tread quite carefully. The second thing, Chair, that was happening in the environment, the only person personally I could trust, so was just myself, and I don't know the extent to which other people are having different mandates to what we're trying to achieve. So one had to protect himself in one way or the other, such that you're not in a way, so to speak, to conclude this ADFA and the fee. But predominantly, Chair, it's what was happening to me in my mind was the fact that I wouldn't be the one to trigger this cancellation fee.
Even if... Oh, sorry,
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Let's go back a little bit. This application to the Reserve Bank, I see your statement doesn't say what it was for. What was it for?
It doesn't say, Chair. The application itself, it's for a Reserve Bank to approve that we will have dealings with a foreign entity, and funds will be flowing to that foreign entity.
Oh, so when you, as ESCOM, are going to be paying money to a foreign entity, you need the approval of the Reserve Bank?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Now, I would imagine that there would be factors that the Reserve Bank would take into account in making a decision on such an application, And some of those factors would count against approving and others would support approving an application such as that. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
Yes. And I would imagine that those factors would be known to people at ESCOM who make such an application to the Reserve Bank. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
And that when making such an application to the Reserve Bank, somebody at ESCOM would need to place before the Reserve Bank as much information as possible to enable the Reserve Bank to make an informed decision one way or another. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
And such factors would have been known to you as well when you made this particular application. Is that correct?
Well, Chair, at the time, this was the very first application that we did, which was sort of outside of the standard. So you quite correct there that I should have detailed the whole structure of the transaction, what was happening, even the concerns, so that they make an informed decision. But at the time, because this was the first time, so I didn't know where to draw the line with regards to what information do I provide or not.
But the concerns that were known to you, both those that you held yourself and maybe those that were held by others that may have been mentioned, now they might have all coincided and everyone who had consent had the same concerns. I don't know. But what we do know is that definitely you had certain concerns. And we know that I think White and Case also had concerns.
Yes.
Now, there might have been an overlap or it might have been exactly the same concerns. Now, would those concerns have been relevant to the Reserve Bank's decision to approve or not to approve the application?
I think the more the information and putting those concerns, it would have been.
And if that is so, you appreciate, don't you, that it would therefore have been important that if they those concerns remained not addressed, when at the time you made the application to the Reserve Bank, they should have been disclosed to the Reserve Bank so that they could then take an informed decision.
Chair, from hindsight, I agree with you.
Yes. And not putting them and not disclosing them was not right.
Yes, Chair.
And the importance of disclosing such information can be overemphasized because you don't want the Reserve Bank to approve an application that actually should not be approved. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Ms. Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So this is one of the professional errors of judgment in terms of not being fully transparent with the Reserve Bank. But at the time, Chair, I don't think there was an intention to mislead, but it is misleading, I agree. There was no intention from my end to mislead, hence I put the information, but it was not sufficient.
Well, one of the parts that causes one concern is that you yourself have told me that you were surprised when the Reserve Bank approved the application, And now we know from what you have said that you didn't disclose to the Reserve Bank information that was relevant and should have been disclosed. The question, and I think Ms. Norman may have asked the question, is how could you be surprised when you didn't disclose information that was important to the Reserve Bank to know before making the decision?
Chair, I think now that this has been brought to the fore and to my awareness at the time, it was a difficult balance to strike as to what information do I agree. There was no way that the Reserve Bank could have read in between the lines to say there's a problem here.
Sometime last week, I think I mentioned to a witness, one of the witnesses who came here last week, or to counsel who was leading evidence, that when we deal with these matters that we are dealing with in regard to procurement, there could be situations where a non-compliance is a bona fide error on the part of somebody whose duty was to make sure that there was compliance. But there could be situations too where non-compliance is deliberate and not a result of a bona fide error or even negligence. It's because it's part of a scheme, to say, look, if we comply with this or that, we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve. Therefore, we are not going to comply because we have a certain agenda or objective that we want to secure. So it becomes important that you look at this from those angles, because there may well be somebody who will say, but was this a bona fide error on Mr. Shweni's part, or was it something else? So it's important to appreciate that.
Thanks, Chair. I still reiterate, from my end, there was no intention and it didn't occur to me. I think if at the point in time, because this was a very good point to stop the process without any challenges, because this would have been the decision of an external party. Internally, some of the submissions that were made, as I alluded to the IFC, for example, it was done bypassing certain processes. So there could have been people at powerful positions deciding not to follow the processes. But this was an external, and other examples as well. But this was an external entity that we were dealing with. And now that Ms. Norman has put this to my attention, I think if we had put all the concerns and everything, and maybe be surprised on the other side where SAB says, why do you divulge all of these, without resolving them? This is a premature application. To be surprised on that side would have been more cautious than not laying it out on the bay.
Well, another question is this. Were you supposed to send to the Reserve Bank an application for the approval that was required that you had reservations about? I'm saying that you had reservations about simply because it seems to me that you did have reservations about its prospects of success. That's why you say you were surprised that it was granted, it was approved. So are you supposed to send an application to the Reserve Bank for approval in circumstances where you yourself think that it's not satisfactory? Or are you only supposed to send to the Reserve Bank something that you are supporting, you are in a position to support yourself?
Normally, Chair, the Reserve Bank approval in our pure financing transactions, we would do it closer to the signing, especially if we're dealing with the foreign entities, closer to the signing and the conclusion of the loan agreement. Under those circumstances, we already know where we're going with this transaction. So ordinarily, we would lodge an application for something that we support and we're quite comfortable with.
Yes, yes.
It's just that in this instance, this company to which we're going to pay the money cropped up in the middle of the process, and we realized that we were going to deal with a foreign entity. And one of the steps that we need to follow, because it was not brought up initially, is to go and lodge an application.
So in terms of the norm, you would not send to the Reserve Bank an application that you do not support or you are not comfortable with?
That's correct, Chair, because at the time of us concluding the loan agreement, we are proceeding with the signing.
Now, this one, we are agreed that you are not comfortable or you had serious reservations about it. We are agreed about that.
Yes, Chair.
Yes. But were you obliged to send it nevertheless, despite your reservations?
It's part of the process, Chair. I think we were ticking the box in terms of that, so that because we're having real difficulty. So once again, if I laid it all bare, this would have really saved us from proceeding. So the obligation, inverted commas, came as a result of that, to say here is an opportunity. This thing is not internal. This is with an external party. I hope the Reserve Bank, with what I have put, will start asking questions. And when they start asking questions, then I send them all the information with all the consents. So that was the thinking.
You see, last week, part of the evidence I had, I can't remember from which witness from ESCOM, but at some stage I had evidence last week to the effect that certain people, I think, gave information that would reveal that what was being done was not right, and therefore wouldn't be done, wouldn't be pursued. I can't remember the details. So I don't know whether in your case you were making the application on the basis that you didn't want it to be approved, or whether you were making the application not caring whether it was approved or not, or you were making the application hoping that it would not be approved, but accepting that it could be approved. So part of what I'm trying to do is to understand where you stood with regard to what you wanted to achieve by making the application and not disclosing some information that should have been disclosed as we have discussed.
Chair, the intention at the end of the day was that this was going to be gatekeeper, which could not be challenged. Hence the surprise. But obviously, to go back, I take the fact that I should have been even more explicit and in line with the intention, so that the application goes in line with the expectation. Well, the expectation was that with the queries that they would raise, as I said, and with the information that I would give in response to those queries, then I don't think the application would have stood any chance of being successful.
Part of the problem with that is you are aware of factors that would count against the Reserve Bank approving the application. You have the opportunity of including these factors in the application so that the Reserve Bank can make a decision not to approve, or if they approved, let it be up to them because they've got all the information. But you don't give them that information that could have assisted the Reserve Bank not to approve the application. That's part of where the problem is.
Yes, Chair, I agree, granted. That was the error of judgment on my side, so not to lay it bare.
You mentioned something earlier about you not wanting to trigger, if I remember correctly, the cancellation fee.
Yes.
I took that to mean you didn't want to be seen to be the one who caused the whole arrangement to be cancelled. Is
Yes,
that
Chair.
right? Is that correct? That's what you were meaning.
Especially if I were to be proved to do that in bad faith. Frustrate
Yes.
the process of conclusion and negotiation.
Yes.
Because I would be the one who triggered that fee to be paid. Because if I err on
Yes.
that side,
Yes.
then it's got other consequences like your fruitless
Yes.
and wasteful expenditure.
Yes. If the Reserve Bank did not approve, then the whole arrangement would not be able to proceed insofar as a foreign entity would have to be used.
That is correct, Chair. And maybe if I can sort of
Yes.
follow up in terms
Yeah.
of the explanation.
Yeah.
We did bring this to the attention of Warong as we're discussing this whole IDEVA and other issue.
Yes.
And they mentioned the fact that they were looking to apply themselves because we had these serious concerns about this entity, to apply themselves to the Reserve Bank to get a foreign account
Yes.
into which when this money is due and payable,
Yes.
it will be payable to them.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of engagements on this.
Yes.
So the alternative was sort of on the table. At that time when this came to the fore, the application had already been lodged.
Now, what would you say to somebody who might say, well, you didn't give, the reason why you didn't give the Reserve Bank this other information about factors that would count against the granting of approval, the reason why you didn't do that because then it could potentially trigger a cancellation, and then you may have thought that you would then be blamed for triggering the cancellation.
No, Chair, that would not have triggered the cancellation.
Yes.
Because it's an independent process, it's
Yes.
outside of sort of ESCOM's control. Perhaps the only or one of the ways that it could have been, is if someone gets hold of the application,
Yes.
of which when we do these transactions, the lawyers representing the lenders, when they check that all the processes have been followed as part of the CPs, they don't only require the approval, but they request the application to see the sufficiency. So in my mind, if someone representing, as an example, the lender, and they see the application, and the application was a bit obstructive, insofar as the approval is solicited, then you trigger, in that instance, you trigger this cancellation clause. Because as much as the facts are correct and as they are, but one could argue that you deliberately went out of your way not to solicit.
I think that's what I'm having in mind.
Yes.
So in other words, it's not the mere decision by the Reserve Bank.
Yes.
It's what may be argued caused the Reserve Bank to arrive at that decision.
Yes, sir.
So in other words, whether it couldn't be said that your thinking might not have been that, look, if I put this negative information in the application and the Reserve Bank does not approve, at some stage somebody might look at the application and see that I put in all these negative things, and maybe I could then be blamed that's the reason why the Reserve Bank refused. So in that way, I triggered. That's what I was talking about.
That's the delicate balance at the time that I had to deal with.
Yes.
But I could have erred on the other side as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And then let's move forward then, Mr. Shweni. You on to paragraph 16.3.3.
Yes.
You indicate there that Warong was keen to proceed with the deal.
Yes, regardless of the fact that at the time we were dealing with a possibility of having some events of default triggered by the situation that we're busy handling of a qualified audit opinion. But they sort of disregarded that, and the two implications with respect to this. No, we cannot enter into any new financing agreement if we have a event of default or a potential event of default. So that we explained to them. I think they kind of stood back for a while, and then they came back even before that issue was finally put to bed. And the second thing is, financially, we're not in a good space. Because of the qualification, we could not raise funding. So the last in our minds was securing 400 million to pay Warong. There was financial requirements for other things. So this didn't become, because of the qualification, this became a secondary, very secondary issue to us. But regardless of that, they insisted on the conclusion.
Yes. And then you tell us about 16.3.4, page 20, about now the short-term financing strategy that came about.
Yes, I don't know the genesis of it because I got involved in the middle, but I think it was at the point where we couldn't solicit funding, and our management executives said to Warong, this is not giving us financing immediately. What we need now, I mean, talking about this alpha or ADFA, what we need now is what's going to give us cash immediately, because nobody is lending to us. So even though those discussions were proceeding, they didn't sort of let go in terms of focusing on the conclusion of the long-term facility. Because in my mind, I think their end goal was that once this is is concluded, the facility fee, upfront facility fee, would have to be paid.
We've canvassed this whole short-term proposal because that was made by Mr. Andre Pillay, who says he made it on the instructions of Mr. Sean Moritz on Friday with him. But then this approach didn't go to the RFP, didn't go the RFP process. It was simply a proposal made to them, and if they had agreed, then ESCOM would have had an agreement with them on that basis.
It didn't go through the RFP, that I can confirm. I was part of 1 or 2 meetings, and my role in terms of this was to review the mandate letter and I see that there was a term sheet attached, short term sheet attached to the mandate letter as well, which I had my comments. And one of the comments that we made to Warong was that if we mandate you, meaning giving the mandate letter to go and raise funding in China, then we're breaching the RFP processes, because there won't be any basis for us to mandate. But I think because of those complications and the guarantee, the whole thing sort of fell flat. Because Warong was insisting that we cannot go and raise funding without a mandate letter.
Yes. And you also deal with the finalization of the fee letter discussions. Before we get to the point where you deal with the pressure that Warong was putting on ESCOM, you want to talk about the fee letter quickly? What the discussions were around the fee letter?
You mean the last paragraph say
yes.
The discussions on the facility did not deter Warong from pursuing the fee letter?
The fee letter.
The fee letter is the one that was going to pay the 400 million.
Yes.
So it's the point that I made earlier to say, even though there were discussions on the short-term facility, they were pushing for the conclusion of the long-term, which had a fee letter, so that the fee letter could be closed out.
Yes. And then in paragraph 16.4, page 20, you deal with what you believe were the reasons that would have made Warong to put pressure for the conclusion of this transaction. And you mentioned them from 16.41. Could you just take us through those briefly?
Well, bypassing the processes, as I've alluded to, in terms of staff taken straight to IFC and the signing, it seems as if there was a rush to end to the desired goal of signing the term sheet. There was a point where I think I was acting for Andre, so I went into Mr. Anoche's office, and I think I was aware that that is not the only transaction. I don't know. In my mind, I was working on, but he asked, how far are we from signing the Warong transaction? And apologies, I never recorded the date, but I was in his office. Mr. Pubi Govender, which we were dealing with, who was in constant defense of everything that was put forward by Warong, ranging from facility fees, the margins, not only to us, but also to our colleagues from corporate finance, whose justification was that this transaction is very expensive. He constantly went from his office to go and put to say what is the stumbling block? Where can I assist? But putting a lot of pressure on us to conclude, and the rushed signing of the ADFA and the term sheet by Mr. Moritz at the end. So all those, to me, while at some stage, and the discussions that I've mentioned between Mr. Andre Pillay and Rajiv, and instances where I was asked to intervene, I think it was during this qualification period we were told that the Chinese delegation is here and they want to understand what exactly is holding up the finalization. And the same gentlemen that we met during the signing, they came, we engaged in a meeting, and I think they wanted to understand what is really holding up, because it seems as if the terms and conditions of the ADFA are almost in agreed form. So those are the points that I'm putting across to say now there was really pressure for the conclusion.
Would this pressure, do you say it came from Hwarong, or was there pressure from inside ESCOM itself, from the various officials within ESCOM to say you must deal with this, you must conclude this transaction?
Personally, inside it was Pubi, who I was dealing with.
Yes.
So it was from him. Externally, it was from Rajiv.
Yes.
Well, I think what you say in 16.4.3.1 is important, especially towards the end. You want to
refer that annexure.
I'm in the statement in paragraph 16.4.3.1,
Yes.
page 20. Mr. Pubi Govender about his support for the deal.
Yes.
I'm thinking that what you have there, what you say that, especially towards the end, is important. You want to just articulate that, how much he supported
Yes.
this deal.
First of all, Chair, with respect to the margin which our colleagues from Corporate Finance, Treasury agreed that it was expensive, he supported what Hwarong put on the table by motivating the fact that ESCOM, in its experience, has never delivered a project within budget. In actual fact, the projects that we are dealing with at the moment, you have a cost escalation that goes up to 100%. So there were a lot of those dialogues between us, and I really struggled, Chair, to find some documentation. I think Mr. Govender was quite smart. He wouldn't pick up a telephone or put his views on in writing. But I managed to find one, I think it's in SS 48, where he's arguing with Mohammed, where Mohammed is putting his point across, that he must not be biased in terms of his conclusion, and the fact that we've never concluded. So the premium that was being asked by Hwarong, which was reflected in their pricing, it's still within what ESCOM would have incurred in any event, considering the fact that in this transaction, the construction risk was not going to reside with ESCOM, but the construction risk was going to reside with Hwarong. All they were going to deliver to us is a product that is working. The agreed cost would have been for the account, that's my reading of 10 key. The agreed cost would have been for the account of the engineering and procurement and construction contractors. Hence, we would not run into these escalations that we are running into at Medupi and Kusile. So that was the point he was making. On the fees, he made a point on the cancellation, for example, to say, yes, you're saying this is not normal for ESCOM to have in their term sheets a cancellation fee. This was the first time seeing me, but there is no intention for us. The intention is to proceed with this transaction, so this becomes a moot point. On the facility fee 1.6, I think he was comparing apples with bananas, because he spoke about the upfront fee that we would ordinarily in a construction environment where we award a contract to a supplier, give an upfront fee ranging from 5 to 15%. So if Hwarong is asking for 1.6%, And that is absolutely nothing in the big scheme of things. So he would constantly, challenge everybody. To me, I even doubted that he's part of this side of the negotiation table.
Well, you do say in paragraph 16.4.3.1 that his responses were very much aligned to HEAs that were wrong.
Yes.
You could swear that he was one of them.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe you could would prefer it, you've mentioned to the chairperson an extra S48. Mr. Chairperson, that would be found in Exhibit U7 at page 474.
Thank you.
Is that the email from Mr. Pubi Govender? Page 474.
Yeah, that's probably not the
Yes.
one.
Not the one that you...
Not the one that relating to the, I wouldn't know it off by hand now which email is that, but this one, this is where he was putting pressure to say, I just don't fully understand what is holding up the conclusion of the agreement and locking the terms.
Yes.
So it was not necessarily on the
On the
costs
outcome.
and everything else. There
Yes.
was an email that I attached, but I can't remember. what
Yes.
it is.
Thank you. But even this one was suggesting that, look, why delay?
Yes.
Yes.
No, and yeah.
Thank you.
Sometimes we'd say to our receptionist, tell him that we're not here.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And
Wasn't
then
that bad?
No, it was bad. And our receptionist, if we were not here, when we come back, he'll say your friend was here. He knew exactly what we were
Yes.
dealing with.
Thank you. And then as one of those pressure points, you also mentioned the signing of the ADFA by Mr. Sean Maritz.
Yes.
Yes. Then you've taken us through then the signing of the ADFA and the fee letter. But these are matters that we all know that
Were happening around
they were
it.
happening around it, and
Yes.
the signing happens, although there's legal advice against it, although there's all pointers saying that red flags, don't touch it, but the signing happened.
It happened, yes.
Yes.
The signing by Mr. Maritz.
By Mr. Maritz, yes.
Yes, it
Yes.
did happen. Perhaps maybe just to jump, I don't know whether,
Yes.
to 17.3.
Yes.
Well, that's not the one. The highlight on 17.3 was that there was an update on the IFC, which really conclusion of it was that please go back and solicit all the sign-offs, legal and everything else. But the other thing that I'm highlighting there was the request, or when I was asked that I could accompany the chairman to China. I didn't know what the chairman had to do with the transaction, so it was a bit odd. But I mean, before I could respond that I don't have visa, Andre said, please tell him when you're approached by his office that you don't have a visa.
Yes.
And I didn't have a visa at the time. But the one that I wanted to highlight was 17.6,
Yes.
which leads to the signing,
Yes.
if that's where you were.
Yes, that's where I was heading.
That's where you were heading.
Yes. Yes, could you tell the chairperson what you want to deal with there?
Yes, well, the paragraph preceding 17.6, I mean, I could see that as we're not winning this. I wrote an email to Mr. Pillay, told him that we should not proceed with this transaction on this basis. That's 17.5, and I've attached that email.
Yes.
17.6, on 25th, I was verbally requested to update the 15th of October board IFC, and that was the first time I was involved in the writing of the submissions. We did it together with Mr. Pillay, and we arrived at the conclusion that the submissions, that all approvals and conclusions by various experts in the organization must be considered before proceeding with the transaction. The following day, and he gave me a very clear instruction to send this to Mr. Khalib Kasim, who was the acting CFO at the time, in PDF format. So I queried this, why PDF format? He said, no, we need to protect the information that we send, because the Word version might be changed. A day later, he called me, asked me to send the saved Word version of the same submission. Unfortunately, I didn't save it, I just saved the PDF. But we asked our local IT guys to come and convert it back. So I sent it. The conclusion in terms of that submission, in terms of the recommendation, was totally different to the earlier version. And that was supposed to be circulated for the round robin, and I learned that the meeting actually set, and that was the day before the loan was an ADFA and term sheet was signed by Mr. Merit. So that's what that paragraph entails.
Thank you. Sorry about that. May I just take,
Yeah.
And in the memorandum of the 25th of October, do you want to highlight anything in that memorandum, or you've captured everything that you wanted to convey?
Memorandum of from who to who?
The submission that you made, SS 57.
57.
Sorry,
Yes, I've highlighted.
You've
that
highlighted what you wanted to say.
Subsequently changed.
Yes, thank
I'm
you.
sorry, 57 of
As-
what bundle?
It's annexure, Mr. Chairman.
Of
Annexure.
what exhibit?
It's annexure SS 57. It will be exhibit U7.
Annexure WS what?
Double 598, Mr. Chairman. At page 598. Is this the submission that you're referring to?
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. No, you haven't found it yet.
You said 598.
Yes, that's correct.
599 would be the start of the submission. 598 it's from Mr. Shweni to Mr. Khalib Kasim, that he has mentioned that he sent it to him.
Yes, the only
Okay, I found it.
Yes.
the only thing that could be a bit misleading in terms of 599 is the fact that we forgot to change the date, that it was going to the board of October and not 15th August.
August.
So I forgot to update at the time when I sent to
Yes.
Mr. Kasim.
Yes.
But I've printed it as I sent it to him with this error on it.
Yes. And what was your recommendation there?
The recommendation is that given all the concerns and risks raised by the organization, the IFC to allow ESCOM to address all concerns in the financing agreement and the governance due process to be followed.
And that.
So, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
So, that submission bears the date of 15 August 2017. And you say that's the original date. But when you sent it to the board, it was much later than that.
That is the original date of the submission I was requested to update.
Yes.
So when I was doing the update, I forgot to
Yes.
change that date.
Yes.
So I sent it to Mr. Khalib Kasim with this error.
Yes.
But we were supposed to change the date to reflect the
Yes.
new date of the meeting.
Yes.
So, but I've printed it the
As it was,
the
yeah.
way I've submitted
Yes.
it to him.
But it was sent in October to the board.
The meeting was gonna be on the 25th or 26th of October. I think
Yeah,
26th, yes.
or you might not recall when you sent it, but it was for a meeting that was later in October.
Well, the page 598,
Yeah,
because from page 599, this is an attachment
yes.
of the email I sent, which
Yeah.
I say, "Hi, Caleb, as requested, regards."
Yes,
So I sent it on the 25th of October.
yeah,
I think if I'm correct, the meeting was gonna be on the 26th of October.
okay, no, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then in paragraph 17.7, we're going back, Mr. Chairman, to exhibit U6A, the statement of Mr. Shweni at page 26, paragraph 17.7. There you deal with the submission of the invoice by Huarong demanding payment from ESCOM.
Yes, Chair, I think after the payment or the signing of the art find the fee letter, my experience when I was in the Treasury, the general manager or Treasurer Andre was not in the office. This invoice was hand delivered by the general manager in the CFO's office, Ms. Mayapan. And she wanted the invoice to be paid immediately, which is a bit extraordinary because instructions normally or requests coming from that office, they're sent to Andre via email and cascaded to us. So she walked into the office herself and had an engagement with the colleagues which were responsible for, or whoever he could see, putting pressure that this invoice needs to be paid.
Yes. And at the time, the CFO was Mr.
Khalib Qasim.
Khalid Hassan. Thank you. And you deal then with matters that happened now, around January 2018. Was this at the point when there was a new board?
That's
within
correct.
ESCOM?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. What happened that you want to highlight in paragraph 19 at page 27, linked to that?
I think what triggered us going to present to board, that's what I think was the letter sent to the new chairman from Orong, which I put as annexure
60.
SS61.
Yes.
So in response to that, we had to give the status and also what our current recommendation. So I put together a presentation. Andre could not make the meeting, so I went to the board to present. And the board agreed that we need to exit. We need not proceed with this transaction.
Yes. And you also made the point that the board, one of the board members commented about authority issue. Of
Yes,
authority.
during the deliberations, one of the members said, in the first instance, the delegation of authority does not permit the subcommittees of the board to approve, but they had to recommend, and board takes that approval decision. And no one in the meeting when that comment was made sort of contested.
Yes. And you then, the paragraph 20, page 27, you deal with SAB now suspending its conditional approval.
That's correct. They didn't hear anything from us. And one of the conditions that they put in the approval was the fact that we need to have inflows before we can pay out anything to Warong or Ideva. And since the lapse of time, that never happened. So they're suspending their previous approval.
Yes. And Mr. Singh, Mr. Pillay, I beg your pardon, yesterday I made the same mistake. Mr. Pillay had written to National Treasury. You are aware of the letters that he had written to Mr. Dondo Mokhojane, who was the
Yes.
Director General of National Treasury, and also to Mr. Sileke, the
Yes.
Director
I'm-
General of Public Enterprise.
I'm aware of those
We are
letters.
aware of those.
Yes.
And that then National Treasury responded to those letters.
National Treasurer responded, yes.
And what did they say?
Well, they were not in support of the request or I think the request was for them to consider the merits of the proposal, and they were not in support of it in essence.
And also to provide guarantees, am I right? There was a request for...
Well, the letter, I think there was a reference made in the letter to the short-term facility.
Yes.
So guarantees would have been made, or reference to the guarantees would have been made in that regard.
Yes.
Not unless there was an error. But the ADFA, the long term, it's clear that it did not have any requirements for the guarantees,
Yes,
but it was for the short term.
Yes, that's the letter that we canvassed with Mr. Henry Pillay when he testified, because it's under his hand, and we highlighted those paragraphs to him. He
Okay.
did also say that the heading of the letter was misleading in the sense that it ought to have simply referred to short-term facility and not to the long-term facility.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you.
But at the time, that letter, my recollection, Chair, is that it was not requesting the provision of guarantees, but I think it was saying we would come back for formal applications.
Yeah.
But I think it was just requesting the consideration of the merits of the proposal.
Yes. And then in the last paragraph, could you just read out what your concluding remarks are?
I believe that we're on concept, just the concept, with all its balance sheet cash flows and implementation benefits in terms of the volume amount that came with, would have been beneficial on different terms and conditions.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just move then to your supplementary statement, which you will find in Exhibit U7. It pages 645. This statement is really sort of a post-mortem of what had happened in the transaction. You're looking at the
Yes.
transaction now
Yes.
with the benefit of hindsight, and you're
Yes.
pinpointing things that you believe were done wrong or incorrectly.
Yes.
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 Could you just highlight those matters to the chairperson, please?
Well, the first point that I'm highlighting
Sorry,
in paragraph...
just a minute, please. It's 6:45, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, I've got it.
Thank you. Yes, you may proceed. Thank you.
Paragraph 1 really deals with the fact that a multidisciplinary team should have been put together because of the complexities, so that the risk analysis is front-loaded. This would have saved us a lot of headaches with respect to this. And I say this is what I did not recommend, because I was exposed in other areas of the business where this is done. And we're talking legal, corporate finance, engineering, specialist in procurement, where if we put this together, this multidisciplinary team, from the very word go, or perhaps just before the signing of the indicative term sheet, there are a lot of things that could have been that would have happened correctly.
Yes.
The second one is specific to Treasury.
Yes.
I've highlighted the fact that the practice note requires us to go to ALCO, and that did not happen. That's 2.1 and 2.2. The other thing that in 2.3, I'm highlighting the fact that because we did not have internal legal upfront, we would have assisted us in checking the implications of signing the binding term sheets. That was not done.
Yes.
But obviously, I mean, we acted against White and Case's advice in that
Yes.
regard. The hastiness in concluding the term sheet and submissions to board, it's something that I also highlight. But I do highlight the fact that the, instructions that were coming from a notch had to be done expeditiously and in the manner in which he wishes. And that we experience from some of the people that were in his office. If you do a submission not in a manner that is suitable to him, even if it's a full stop or a comma, it would come back. But stuff that came, so that was one of the issues that I'm highlighting, to say
Yes.
things had to be done which are coming from the CFO quite expeditiously. 2.5, I've spoken about 2.6. For me, it was clear that the fact that we did not proceed with the discussions around the quantums of the fees and everything else, clearly the horse was bolted. All we did was to discuss just the structuring of those fees. 2.7 deals with the signing. I've touched on that, but the only new thing on the signing was the fact that we had to put together a memo for the interim chief executive at the time, because he was going to attend, Mr. Machela Koko, he was going to attend the signing, just to appraise him of the transaction. I looked for those signed memos, none of those, so I don't know whether they reached them, they've read them. So I'm highlighting the fact that part of the issues with regard to the process is that we put together certain memos, and there is no proof that these memos have been read or signed.
Yes.
I've spoken about 2.8 in terms of the signing of the term sheet. I've spoken about 2.9 about the board and the fact that the approval had to happen not at subcommittee level, but at board
Yes.
level. 2.10, I'm speaking about the RFI and the RFP process, and the fact that we had conversations with them, irrespective of the fact that we were still during the RFP process. The last point is that in the term sheet there was make mention that before we engage in alpha discussions, we had to provide a mandate letter. That did not happen. So all these points are pointing to the processes that were flouted, so to speak.
Yes. Then in paragraph 3, page 649, you deal with matters that happened post the signing of the... Could you just read that paragraph, because I'm going to ask you a question that relates to that.
Post signing of the term sheet, Andre myself put best effort to get to get the desired outcome from the negotiations and from conclusion of relevant agreements.
Yes. So at this point, am I correct that what you are conveying here, you, from the Treasury side, you wanted this deal to go through? You're negotiating, making sure that everything happens?
Yes.
Yes. What would you say if at this point you were supporting this transaction?
It was in early stages of the transaction.
And you were supportive of it as Treasury?
Supportive, yes.
Mr. Pillay on Friday said, he never supported this transaction. What would you say to that?
No, I think the reason why from the benefits that I have highlighted below this paragraph, which we saw in terms of the value, the amounts, and everything else, the fact that it would save us at the stage 14th of March or after 14th of March, we continued to engage because we believe that we could negotiate better structuring of the fee. Otherwise, we would not have wasted time and effort and fight with the likes of Mr. Rajiv Thomas if we did not think that there would come a better outcome. Personally, I think we still hoped that there would something would come out of this transaction, in spite of what I term in the previous page that for some of the things the horse was bolted.
Yes. And then in paragraph, just below paragraph 3, you have items that you list from 3.1 to 3.11,
Yes.
which you regard as benefits. To ESCOM.
We regarded this as benefits or windows of opportunity that we could exploit.
Yes. Could you just run through them?
Yes,
As to what were they?
The first one relates to the contradiction of the binding and non-binding term sheet, and I've highlighted the points there. So this provided us a window of opportunity for us to still negotiate, irrespective or despite the fact that the term sheet was signed. The volume of financing, which is 2.2 billion, which is 3.3, was quite significant for us. Diversification of funding sources was an important Treasury mandate. So because we normally source our funding from the West, which is from China, Europe and the States. But I must stress this would not have been the first agreement that we would have, because we had already an existing agreement with China Development Bank. So, but that diversification was quite important for us. The utilization of government guarantees, which encumbers also government, because if they approve a guarantee, it goes into their balance sheet as a contingent liability. So if you get a sizable facility like this one, which you don't utilize government guarantees, then it is the plus for us. When we have to convert rands to dollars or get facilities, banks usually give us some facilities or credit lines. This would save us those credit lines because the financing would have been arranged by Wrong for the SPVs. What we've also found in some of the transactions is that we had to repay before commissioning or construction is completed. So now you'll have an overlap in terms of your cash flows where you're still receiving, you're withdrawing from a facility, but you're still repaying. Ideally, those contracts were structured such that the payment starts immediately after the construction is completed. But due to the delays, the lenders were not flexible, not to receive their payments. And this would have, and Kusile and Medupi was a typical example of that. This would have allowed us that the outflows would happen once the equipment or plant is commissioned. I use the word in 3.8 loosely and put in inverted commas tied, because this really depends on how the contract would be structured. But during the lease payment, there's still some links between ESCOM and the project implementer, so that when the latent defects, we could approach them. 3.9 is mute because it's a moot point because it affects all the agreements. And 10, there's a likelihood, this is not guaranteed, that the cost will be kept, but theoretically under the 10 key structure, all the overruns are for the contractor. What we normally have in a bond setup where we raise funding, and that funding is not utilized directly or immediately because of the delays. As Treasury, we suffer carry cost. This would avoid those carry costs. So those are the benefits that would have been brought by this.
And you also identify the concerns and what you regard as bad agreements that ESCOM entered into during this period.
Yes, I have most of them in the previous statement
yes.
Covered them because they talk about the cancellation fee, the upfront fee,
yes.
Due diligence and all. Yes. And so in the main, that's what we are covering.
Yes. And in all of this, I understand that, look, you would have wanted now the transaction to be brought, to be concluded, because you are seeing these benefits at the same time you're having all these doubts about it. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the whole basis of running with the transaction initially was that, look, Hwarong Energy Africa was going to get funding from China Hwarong management. In your dealings, I may not be mentioning the title correctly, but in your dealings with Hwarong Energy Africa, did you ever get any confirmation whatsoever from the parent company that they alleged was going, because that's the one that had assets up to 2 trillion, if I'm correct. Did you ever get correspondence from that parent company to say, yes, we will back this up?
As far as I remember, and those assurances were brought to our attention during the ADFA discussions,
Yes.
to say the link between Hwarong Energy Africa and the parent company, which they purport to be their parent company, were very weak. So letters of confirmations would be required for us to get assurance that there is support from the parent company, which is China. And that did not come to the fore,
Yes.
as far as I remember.
Yes. And all your benefits, which you've highlighted, would have happened only if that dream was realized, where the management company with all the money and all the financial muscle would have backed up the transaction.
Part of it,
Yes.
yes, that would give us assurance that there is someone behind Hwarong, because the other companies above it, there is nothing much to show. And also the fact that they wrong when they put together their RFP and RFI proposal, they append or attach to their proposals the financial statements of that company. So it would have given us some assurance. However, and that's why I'm saying partly, because that would not have resolved, that would have resolved some issues,
Yes.
but a lot of things that would need to have been addressed, because not all the financing would have come from that company, according to my understanding.
Yes.
Wrong would, that's why they had letters of expression of interest from the likes of CDB, because they were going to solicit a better part of the funding from the Chinese financial market, not necessarily from the parent company. I think this was also tested, sorry to
Yes.
elaborate on the point. So this was also tested when there was an engagement. I was in that meeting about the short-term facility, because of the trillions that were mentioned. I think the impression from all of us was that there is a big pocket of money from the parent company, which could easily be channeled through to HEA. And I remember one first proposal that Andrew made was that, can these guys just buy our bonds, because it is much simpler, and they are in that market, and that didn't prove to be the case.
Yes. So at what point then did you realize that, this thing is not going to be good for Eskom?
Shane might have been late in terms of putting that memorandum that I referred to on the 25th of October, which I append here.
Yes.
But that is one of the points that I've raised. And that memorandum is taken from the memorandum of June, because I could see that things are not working out the way, regardless of these benefits, but we were dealing with very onerous terms. We were dealing with the companies that we could not verify, the people that were putting pressure. So, in all honesty, if it occurred to me when I was putting together the SAB, that would have been an opportunity to to clamp down and kill this. So around 25th, personally, for me, process just had to be followed such that we don't trigger that cancellation clause. So that, and the intention was that all the way, I think around from June, July, because we see that these guys are not backing down. I don't think the intention was to proceed, but the intention was to back off.
Yes. I'm sorry, Ms. Chele, just would like me to just refer you to page 451 of Exhibit U7, which is where the structure that we're talking about, the structure of the company is.
450.
Exhibit U7 at page 451. You've already spoken about the China Huarong Asset Management Company.
Yes.
Yes.
Did you say 481?
451, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yes, Chair, I think it was part of the sub-application that we alluded to much earlier. And the intention of this was to bring to the attention of SAP, as I said, how complex this is. But the ultimate holding of Huarong to the top company,
Yes.
I think it works out to about 8%. So by no stretch of imagination, this is a subsidiary of China Huarong.
Yes.
And perhaps that explains why there could have been nothing forthcoming with respect to that letter of guarantee or letter of support.
Yes. And this transaction from 2015, 2016, 2017, up until January 2018, when people started realizing that, this is not going to work, don't touch it. I just want to understand what was pushing it. Because, I know I've asked this question, but for me, I haven't received an answer, either from you or Mr. Pillay, really. I would like to know, what is it that was driving this whole thing when everyone could see that it was not going to be beneficial to ESCOM?
Well, besides the benefits that I've highlighted, the risk really outweigh, as you correctly put it. The risk that we were finding as we proceed with the transaction. Well, you're stretching it back to 2015. I've started my engagement in 2016, but I take your point. It is quite a lot of time. For us not to have made the decision much more earlier. Personally, I have made comments on the term sheet as early as in December, leading up to the March signing, expressing the discomfort. The email that I sent on the 25th June and October could have come at a later stage. But I think the board, we should have alerted the board much earlier when we got uncomfortable around June or so, because they are the ones who, as we have done in the new board of the 24th of January 2018. And I think the landscape at that point in time was very different to the regime of the past. We knew the agenda, we knew why they were brought there. Hence, in my presentation to them, I think we were comfortable to recommend that we do not proceed. It could have been that the regime before that board, we had to play it safe. We didn't know what was, who's behind you. So whoever proposed to the board IFC of the third of Feb, August, but I was involved in the October one. We perhaps, especially in the August one, we should have pushed very hard, not necessarily submit something which says we recommend proceeding, but to say there are problems.
Yes. And Treasury being Treasury by its very nature, anyone who says Treasury is in support of this would believe that Treasury would have cleared everything that it has to clear, and one would say, let's support it because Treasury supports it. So your department was critically connected to the decisions that would have followed because Treasury displayed that we were in support of this. We did take Mr. Pillay through some of the memos that he had penned during that period. Or am I wrong? Maybe
No,
Treasury is not as key as I think it is.
It is key, but obviously it's incumbent upon the board members. I had a privilege of reading one of the detailed minutes, which we don't normally get. And some of the board members are teasing the presentations and the statements that are being made. But it is considered in very high regard within the organization. So if we say we're in support, I think it changes the view of the members, even in their interrogation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Was that your last question?
That was my last question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Shweni. If a need arises for you to be asked to come back, you will be asked. But for now, you are excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. That is the last, you're the only witness for the day. Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. And then tomorrow, how many witnesses have we got? Do you know?
I know of one witness tomorrow, Mr. Chairperson, and
Yeah.
yes,
Okay, no, that's all right.
yes, thank you.
We'll adjourn then until tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We adjourn.